Here's where things actually stand. As of today, the ceasefire is technically holding. 3 American destroyers transited the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday after dodging an Iranian missile and drone barrage. A Chinese flag tanker sanctioned by the United States carrying a Chinese crew falsely registered in Malawi transited the strait in defiance of the American blockade and was not stopped. Iran's Revolutionary Guards threatened to target U.S. military sites across the Middle East if Washington fires on another Iranian oil tanker. Trump said that if Iran doesn't sign the deal, they will see one big glow coming out of Iran. Qatar's prime minister flew to Miami to meet with Trump's envoys. The Islamabad peace talks, the one round of direct negotiations held so far, collapsed on the 2 hardest issues, the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's nuclear program. And in 4 days, Trump boards Air Force One for Beijing. U.S. Central Command said it has turned around 58 commercial vessels attempting to exit or enter Iranian ports through the Strait of Hormuz, an increase of just 1 ship from nearly a day earlier. 1 ship in almost 24 hours of blockade enforcement. The most powerful navy in the world operating with 21 warships, including a carrier strike group, turning around 1 additional vessel per day in the corridor through which 20% of the world's oil normally flows. That is not a blockade succeeding. That is a blockade that has reached the boundary of what it can achieve without crossing a line that would turn a regional war into something categorically larger. And the line is China. China's defense minister said plainly, "We have trade and energy agreements with Iran. We expect others not to interfere in our affairs. The Strait of Hormuz is open to us. Open to us. Not we urge restraint. Not. We call for diplomacy. Open to us." A Chinese defense minister telling the United States Navy operating a declared blockade of an Iranian-aligned waterway that Chinese vessels will transit regardless of American orders to turn around. And the Chinese flag sanctioned tanker transited and was not stopped. That single passage, 1 ship unremarkable to most of the world, buried in maritime news, is the most strategically significant event of the entire Hormuz crisis. Because it answered the question that every actor in this confrontation has been waiting to see answered since the blockade began on April 13th. The question was, what happens when the American blockade meets a Chinese vessel? Is there an desert? The answer on May 7th, 2026 was, nothing happens, nothing happened. The ship went through. No American warship intercepted it. No boarding party, no warning shots, no confrontation. The ship, carrying a Chinese crew flying a third country flag sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury, affiliated with Chinese commercial interests in Iranian oil, transited the blockade that Washington declared with 0 tolerance and emerged on the other side. The Asia Times described the core dilemma with clinical precision. The big concern must be the serious risk of escalation if the U.S. attempts to enforce the blockade on a Chinese-owned vessel. None of this will be welcomed by the U.S. president and his national security team. That is the corner. That is why Washington has no good move left. Let's reconstruct the full architecture of the trap, because it was not built in a day. And understanding how each wall was erected is the only way to understand why there is no door left. The American strategy in the Strait of Hormuz rested on a sequence of escalating pressure tools, each designed to make the cost of Iranian non-compliance unacceptable. First military strikes, then a counter-blockade of Iranian ports. Then Project Freedom, the escort operation to restore commercial shipping, then the threat of resume bombing at higher intensity. Each tool was deployed. Each produced a military result. None produced a strategic outcome. Iran did not capitulate. The strait did not reopen. Commercial shipping did not return to normal. The reason is structural. Iran's strategy was never to defeat the U.S. Navy in open battle. It was to sustain enough perceived threat that insurance companies would not cover the risk and shipping companies would not accept it. Commercial shipping requires more than physical safety. It requires insurance, contractual certainty, confidence that tomorrow will look like today. None of those conditions have been met, even with American destroyers in the strait. But the deeper structural problem is not Iran. Iran is the visible adversary. The structural problem is that every escalation option Washington reaches for now carries a China risk that it did not carry at the beginning of the crisis. And the China risk has a specific shape. If the U.S. Navy stops, boards, or fires on a Chinese vessel attempting to transit the strait, a vessel that China's defense minister has publicly declared has the right to pass. The confrontation ceases to be about Iran. It becomes a direct kinetic incident between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Not a proxy confrontation, not a sanctions dispute, a confrontation between American sailors and Chinese sailors in a waterway that China has declared open to its commercial interests. The Iran-China 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement encompasses oil, gas, banking, telecommunications, and military sectors, giving Beijing influence not just over Iranian resources, but indirectly over the physical infrastructure of the Strait of Hormuz itself. From Washington's perspective, this arrangement effectively places Chinese strategic interests at the operational controls of global energy supply. Chinese strategic interests at the operational controls of global energy supply. That sentence is not hyperbole. It is a structural description of what the 25-year agreement combined with the blocking statute, the yuan toll, the 3 Araji Wang Yi phone calls, the Beijing briefing, and China's defense minister's explicit declaration of open access has produced. China has, without firing a single shot, without deploying a single warship to the strait, without formally entering the conflict, placed itself inside the operational logic of the Hormuz confrontation in a way that constrains every American move. This is the corner. Let's map its 4 walls precisely. The first wall is the Chinese tanker president. The Rich Star transited. It was not stopped. If it had been stopped, China would have had grounds for a direct military confrontation with the United States in a body of water that Beijing's defense minister had publicly declared open to Chinese commerce. Washington calculated that the cost of that confrontation in the week before the Trump Xi summit, with the ceasefire already fragile, with the global economy already absorbing record energy price shocks, was too high. So the tanker passed, and in passing, it established a precedent that every subsequent Chinese vessel will cite. The blockade has a China exemption not formally declared, operationally demonstrated. The blocking statute invoked by China's Ministry of Commerce on May 2nd, the first activation of that legal instrument in its 5-year existence, placed U.S. companies in the position of choosing between compliance with U.S. or Chinese regulatory regimes. Any expansion of U.S. sanctions to include Chinese banks could further disrupt payment channels used to settle transactions involving Iranian crude. The second wall is the financial escalation ceiling. The United States has sanctioned Chinese refineries. China responded by invoking the blocking statute. The next escalation step, sanctioning Chinese banks that process payments for Iranian oil, would be orders of magnitude more disruptive. Chinese banks are integrated into the global financial system in ways that Chinese prochemical firms are not. Sanctioning a major Chinese bank is not a targeted measure. It is a systemic shock to global financial markets. China has continued to purchase Iranian oil during the conflict, importing well over 1 million barrels per day last month, drawing down stock from floating storage already in Asia and unaffected by the U.S. naval blockade. To stop that flow through financial means would require measures whose collateral damage to the global economy would dwarf the current energy price shock. Washington cannot go there without triggering the crisis it is trying to resolve. The third wall is the UN Security Council. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent urged China and Russia to stop blocking initiatives at the United Nations, including a resolution encouraging steps to protect commercial shipping in the Strait. The word urging is doing significant work in that sentence. China and Russia have already vetoed one resolution. They will veto another. The entire multilateral legal framework that could authorize collective action to restore freedom of navigation has been permanently disabled by 2 permanent Security Council vetoes. Washington cannot build a legitimate international coalition to force the strait open. Every action it takes operates in a grayer legal space than it would if the Security Council had acted. The fourth wall is the summit itself. Trump arrives in Beijing in 4 days, already having both sides in his court in the space of a week is a win for Xi, who aims to cement China's role as a global power player. Negotiating with an increasingly unpopular U.S. leader bogged down in a costly war and looking for easy wins is also likely not an unwelcome position in Xi's eyes. The summit makes resuming maximum pressure on Iran, the bombing threat, the Project Freedom restart, the expanded blockade politically toxic for the next 4 days at minimum. You do not launch a military escalation against a country whose principal diplomatic protector you are flying to visit in order to ask for help. The summit creates a window of enforced de-escalation that Iran can use to harden its position, rebuild logistics, restock drone inventories, and wait. Every day before May 14th is a day the ceasefire holds on Iran's terms, not Washington's. And every day the ceasefire holds on Iran's terms is a day that the Chinese tanker precedent solidifies that the blocking statute becomes more established as operational reality. That the UN-denominated trade flows through alternative channels accumulate more transaction history, and that Washington's options narrow further. This is what cornered looks like in geopolitics. It does not look like a military defeat. It looks like a situation where every available move carries unacceptable costs, where the tools that worked in previous confrontations no longer work because the adversary has built around them, and where the calendar, the summit, the midterms, the ceasefire window has become a constraint that shapes what is possible more than the naval hardware in the water. Now, let's talk about what China is actually doing with this position. Because the cornering of Washington on Hormuz is not the end of China's strategy. It is the means to a larger objective. And understanding that objective is what explains why this crisis, however it resolves in the short term, represents a structural shift in global order that will outlast the specific negotiation about Iranian uranium enrichment. China's defense minister said, "The Strait of Hormuz is open to us." On the same day, 3 U.S. destroyers transited the strait after dodging Iranian missiles. 2 simultaneous realities. American destroyers fighting their way through. Chinese tankers passing freely. The same waterway, the same day, different rules for different flags. That is the world that China is normalizing. Not the world where the strait is Chinese controlled, but the world where the strait has tiered access, where the American security guarantee of unconditional freedom of navigation has been replaced by a system in which access is negotiated, commercially denominated, and differentially available based on political alignment. A world where Iranian drones deter Western commercial shipping while Chinese tankers move. Where the blocking statute protects Chinese financial flows from American sanctions. Where yuan-denominated tolls are proposed as the price of transit and described by Iranian state media as reflecting a new balance of power. The Iran-China 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement placed Chinese strategic interest within the operational infrastructure of the world's most critical energy corridor. Washington's analysis concluded this arrangement was structurally unacceptable, effectively giving Beijing indirect control of global energy supply through its Iranian partner. But the analysis arrived after the architecture was already built. The agreement was signed in 2021. The blocking statute mechanism was created in 2021. The Enbridge platform was being developed in parallel. The SEEP's transaction infrastructure was being scaled simultaneously. China did not improvise its position in response to the 2026 Iran war. It built the position over 5 years in plain sight and activated it when the conditions were right. Now, here is the question that matters for every viewer of this situation. The question that reaches beyond the specific naval standoff in the Persian Gulf and into the daily lives of people who have nothing to do with Iran or China or Hormuz. What does it mean when the world's most powerful navy cannot enforce a blockade it declared? Because doing so risks confrontation with a country it is simultaneously flying to for diplomatic help. It means that naval supremacy and strategic control are no longer the same thing. The United States has not lost its Navy. Its ships are in the water. Its aircraft are in the air. Its missiles are more accurate and more numerous than any adversaries. None of that has changed. What has changed is the translation mechanism, the process by which naval hardware converts into political outcomes. That translation mechanism requires the credible willingness to use force against any actor without exception. And the China exception has now been demonstrated. The Council on Foreign Relations noted that she has shown little appetite to apply acute pressure on the Iranian regime, preferring to let the United States embroil itself in another Middle East conflict. Meanwhile, Chinese firms have been selling satellite imagery used to target U.S. forces in the region. Chinese firms selling targeting imagery for Iranian strikes on American military assets. While China's foreign minister calls for peace, while China's defense minister declares the strait open to Chinese commerce, while China's president prepares to host the American president who needs a deal. This is the full picture, not neutral, not a concerned bystander urging restraint. An actor that has positioned itself on every side of this confrontation, simultaneously using commercial relationships to sustain Iran, using legal instruments to shield its own firms from American sanctions, using diplomatic positioning to claim the mediator's role, and using information sales to help Iran sustain the military pressure that keeps Washington desperate for a resolution. And in 4 days, Washington sends its president to Beijing to ask this actor for help. The answer to the question, does China have good moves left, is yes, multiple. Beijing can press Iran into a deal and claim credit for resolution. It can withhold pressure on Iran and extract more concessions from Trump. It can let the summit produce atmospherics without substance and wait for the midterms to further weaken Washington's position. It can use the rare earth lever, the Taiwan arms sale delay, the UAN oil settlement framework, the blocking statute, any or all of these as bargaining chips in a negotiation where it holds all of them simultaneously. The answer to the question, does Washington have good moves left, is what this script has been building toward, not many, and none of them good. The good move options that remain for Washington resolve into 3 categories, each with fatal constraints. The first is a comprehensive deal at the summit. Iran, trade, rare earths, Taiwan posture, all packaged into a framework that gives Trump the headlines he needs. The constraint is that a comprehensive deal requires concessions on Taiwan and technology controls that Congress will challenge, that allies will read as abandonment, and that she will use as the floor for the next 3 summits scheduled through 2027. The second is a limited deal. Chinese commercial purchases, a board of trade token language on Hormuz that Trump can frame as a win without the structural concessions. The constraint is that a limited deal does not resolve the Iran standoff, does not lower gas prices before November, does not restore commercial shipping to Hormuz, and does not address the blocking statute confrontation. It produces headlines on day 1 and a worsening strategic position on day 30. The third is no deal at all. A summit that produces photographs but no substance, followed by a resumed military campaign against Iran that bombs more hardened targets and drives oil above $120 a barrel before the November midterms. The constraint is that this path ends the ceasefire, alienates China before the 4 planned summits this year, and produces the domestic political outcome that Trump's advisors have been trying to avoid since February. There is no 4th option that does not carry one of those constraints. CSIS assessed that the Trump-QI summit will likely represent a relatively modest step toward greater stability and predictability in the bilateral relationship. China feels confident enough to stand up to Trump on many key issues. The PRC's eagerness to hold the summit signals it is less confident than many observers believe. But the recent Arachi visit shows China has already positioned itself as having weighed in with Iran to reopen the strait, less confident than observers believe. That is the counterweight that prevents this analysis from becoming a story of Chinese omnipotence. Beijing has genuine constraints. The prolonged strait closure cost China too. energy inputs, inflationary pressure on Asian trading partners, strain on Gulf state relationships, the domestic political cost of being seen as enabling a war that has global humanitarian consequences. She needs something from this summit as much as Trump does. He needs the tariff truce extended. He needs the technology control confrontation managed. He needs the perception of responsible global statecraft before his fourth term begins next year. The difference between two constrained actors is not that one is unconstrained. It is that one entered the negotiation with more leverage, more options, and better information. Iran briefed, she's tanker passed. The blocking statute was filed. The veto was cast. The Iraqi meeting was convened at China's invitation. The satellite imagery was sold. Washington turned around 58 ships and waited for an Iranian response that has not come. The summit begins in 4 days. The deal, if it comes, will be written in the language of mutual benefit and shared interests. Both sides will claim victories. The headlines will say stability. The markets will tick up. Oil will ease toward 90. And underneath all of it, in the structure of what was conceded and what was extracted, in the precedents established and the lines not crossed, in the language quietly modified and the arms sale quietly delayed, the shape of the post-American Hormuz world will have been quietly negotiated. Not by military defeat, by the patient, systematic construction of a corner from which no good move leads out. Washington built that corner itself, one decision at a time, over 72 days. Beijing just waited for it to be